They thought you disappeared, faded, gone like a myth with no sequel, so they relaxed, grew arrogant, began telling the story their way, how you broke, how you lost, how you were a lesson in what happens when someone flies too close to their own potential. But then, without announcement, without apology, you posted a single image. Not staged, not filtered, not drenched in performance. It was you, unapologetically refined, not a comeback, a confirmation. The photo didn't scream for attention. It breathed power. It was quiet yet seismic. And in that silence, 10,000 old voices began to stutter, unsure how to explain what they were now seeing. There was no caption needed. Your posture said enough. The angle of your chin, the steadiness in your eyes, the complete absence of apology in your presence. People scanned it, zoomed in, studied the details, because they were looking for the trick, for the mask, for the proof that it was still you. But the old version, the one they buried in gossip, wasn't present. That image revealed what your words never tried to say. You evolved in a place they couldn't reach. You sharpened in shadows. And now the mere evidence of your existence is offensive to those who hoped you'd stay erased. You didn't post the photo for validation. You did it because truth no longer fears being seen. You became the kind of presence that unsettles even in pixels. That one shot broke group chats, unlocked buried groupthink, made people pause and wonder what else you've been building while they were mocking the rubble. It's not the image that scared them. It's the energy behind it. You didn't just look better. You looked like someone who doesn't need forgiveness or revenge. You looked free. And people who thrive on control have no response for freedom that doesn't beg. The irony is that you said nothing. Not a single line to defend yourself. Not a paragraph to update them. You didn't explain where you were or how you came back stronger. You just stood there in that captured second and let them choke on their assumptions. The ones who swore they were over you couldn't look away. The ones who betrayed you felt their chest tighten, because healing isn't supposed to look that regal. They wanted the healed version to be quiet, tame, small. But there you were, composed like royalty, while they blinked in disbelief, wondering how you turned exile into evolution. Your absence used to be their proof you lost, but now your presence is a mirror, and they don't like what they see. That photo reflected more than your image. It exposed the gap, the one between who they said you were and who you became. You didn't post a revenge body. You posted a reset soul, the kind of energy you can't fake, mimic, or copy. And in a world obsessed with performance, that level of authenticity is terrifying, because it makes everyone else look like they're still rehearsing. It made them question how much time they've wasted pretending while you were becoming. That one picture destroyed their narrative, because if you could come back this poised, this clear, this powerful, then maybe everything they said about you was projection. And now they're forced to reckon with the idea that they weren't victims of your chaos. They were the architects of their own denial. You didn't post it to hurt them, but it hurt them anyway. Because growth that demands no recognition always pierces those who need to be seen to feel real. You didn't glow up, you ignited, quietly, deliberately. And that glow wasn't about beauty, it was about boundaries. And that's what really shook them. There are people who still haven't recovered from seeing you win without them. They thought they would be part of your next chapter. They thought your silence meant you needed saving. But the photo showed otherwise. It showed someone who rescued themselves. And the self-rescued are the most dangerous, because they don't wait to be chosen. They don't beg to be remembered. They build alone, and when they appear again, they carry the kind of energy that shifts entire rooms without asking permission. You didn't rise to prove a point, but your existence became the point. And for some, that's too much truth to bear. The photo was timestamped with closure. It ended 1,000 conversations without you ever entering the room. Old enemies sat in silence. Former friends fumbled with their stories. Because that one image clarified everything. It was you, but not the you they remember. And that gap between memory and reality made them uncomfortable. They had trained themselves to look down on you, but now their own gaze was trembling. They saw someone who had no anger left to waste, no time left to bleed, no space left to rent. You didn't just reclaim your identity. You redefined what it meant to be seen. Let them gossip. Let them wonder. Let them rewrite their memories to make peace with how wrong they were. That photo isn't just a picture. It's a scar wrapped in elegance. A declaration written without ink. You are no longer the villain in their script. You've become the author of your own. And that picture was page 1. Now every step you take, every move you make, carries that same energy. You don't need to speak loudly. You don't need to post often. You just need to keep being someone who terrifies the mediocre with the calm of someone who no longer seeks approval. You are a living contradiction to every limitation they placed on you. And now that truth has a face. Yours, captured, posted, etched in their memory, not because you forced them to look, but because they couldn't look away. Your photo didn't just break the internet. It broke the illusion. And now every breath you take, every smile you share, every silent step you walk forward, echoes in the chambers of the people who misjudged you. That's what real revenge feels like. Not rage, not a scream, just undeniable presence, cold, calm, and beautifully out of reach. They celebrated your disappearance like it was a funeral they arranged, quietly, subtly, with passive smirks and rehearsed silence. Not because you had done something unforgivable, but because your existence threatened the illusion they lived in. You were too awake, too raw, too unwilling to let mediocrity wear a mask of nobility. So they did what small minds do when a presence cannot be contained. They buried it, with rumors, with distance, with a calculated withdrawal disguised as maturity. They didn't clap when you healed. They clapped when you disappeared. What they didn't realize was that some seeds only bloom underground. The version of you they feared the most wasn't loud. It was stable. The one they tried to destroy was the one that didn't beg. The one that stopped asking for clarity. The one that no longer played emotional charades just to keep peace with people who only offered war. And when that version returned, polished, unshakable, carved in restraint, they flinched. Not because you changed, but because you stayed. They had written your exit. Yet here you were, rewriting the script in silence. And the silence was louder than any apology they had rehearsed but never delivered. You didn't crawl back. You rose. And every movement you made reminded them of their failed campaign to erase you. They had expected trauma to keep you quiet. But pain became your discipline. They thought heartbreak would make you desperate. Instead, it made you clean. They thought time would make you forget. Instead, it made you precise. The version of you they see now isn't interested in revenge. It is the revenge, a walking contradiction to every prediction they whispered behind closed doors. You didn't become cold. You became immune, and immunity terrifies those who depend on reaction to feel relevant. They can't recognize you, and that's the punishment. You look like the same face, but the light in your eyes no longer asks to be loved. It demands to be respected. They try to interact with you using old tactics, old phrases, old patterns. But nothing lands, nothing registers, because you are not the character they remember. You are the editor now, the one who knows where the narrative gets trimmed. And your scissors are sharper than ever. They remember trying to bury you with laughter, but they forgot that the earth they buried you in became your armor. That soil grew teeth. You don't need to confront them. Your progress does that for you. The weight you lost wasn't just on your body. It was spiritual, emotional, energetic. You used to carry entire relationships on your back, convinced that loyalty meant self-erasure. But now your spine is straight, not because of ego, because of standards. The kind of standards that cannot be negotiated, no matter how many times someone says, but we go way back. History doesn't exempt people from accountability, and your return, cloaked in self-respect, has forced them to answer questions they thought they buried with you. They never expected to see you again. Not like this. They expected a ghost, a shadow, a softer version who still questioned their absence. But you returned with clarity sharp enough to cut old dynamics at the root. And now they're stumbling, unsure whether to greet you or retreat. Because you no longer smile just to be liked. You don't nod just to avoid conflict. You're not afraid of silence anymore. You weaponized it. And in rooms where you were once dismissed, now your silence controls the air. The tension they feel when you enter isn't your fault. It's their reflection trembling in the presence of someone they tried to reduce. They built entire narratives while you healed. Falsehoods, rewritten timelines, stories that placed them on moral pedestals while painting you as unstable, emotional, irrational. But narratives don't hold up when the truth walks in without needing applause. Your stability is a threat. Your peace is an indictment. You don't even speak about what they did. You don't need to. Your composure holds court, and their guilt does the talking. You have become the proof that time doesn't erase truth. It refines it until the people who twisted it choke on their own edits. They thought they'd never feel small again, that removing you gave them status, that your silence was submission. But the day you returned, not with vengeance, but with vision, something broke. You didn't beg. You didn't correct. You didn't even clarify. You simply existed in full power, and it cracked the mask they wore so carefully. You became the mirror. And in that mirror, they saw the version of themselves they were hoping to hide. You didn't need to expose them. Your existence made them transparent. Now they avoid your name in conversations. They skip your posts quickly, not because they've moved on, but because they haven't. You remind them what they tried to erase and failed. You are the return of everything they buried in haste, the apology they never gave, the truth they tried to silence. And the worst part for them is that you require nothing, no reconciliation, no attention, no stage, you just walk. And with every step, their carefully curated world bends slightly, cracks slightly, folds in on itself slightly. Because the buried now buries them. You don't need to win loudly. Your breath alone is evidence of endurance. Your energy now lives in its own league. Their tactics no longer apply. Their language no longer translates. Their guilt no longer finds a home in you. You've outgrown the crime scene. And now, when they look in your direction, they feel the echo of something ancient. Shame. The kind that doesn't need to be screamed. The kind that follows them home. Because the version of you they tried to kill not only lived, it became immortal. And now, it's not revenge they fear. It's memory. You didn't need to speak for them to feel the gravity of your presence. The lines near your eyes, the calm behind your gaze, the way your shoulders no longer curled forward to accommodate anyone's comfort. It was all a quiet archive of suffering turned into strength. You didn't decorate yourself with survival stories. You didn't name drop your battles. You didn't perform your pain. And that silence made it even louder. They could feel it without a single sentence. They stood in front of someone who had gone to war with their own shadow and came back dignified. And in that moment, the giggles they shared behind your back began to rot in their own mouths. There was something unsettling about your calm. Not the kind of peace that comes from resolution, but the kind that arrives after chaos has been accepted and outlived. You looked like someone who doesn't just forgive betrayal, but learns from it without flinching. They tried to reduce you to a rumor. They turned your pain into performance. They passed stories like canyon circles that lacked substance. But now, standing in your presence, their narratives couldn't survive the truth stitched into your expression. They were speaking cartoons while you had lived documentary. And it showed. In the stillness of your walk, in the unhurried way you blinked, in the restrained force you now carried like armor beneath a tailored coat. Their laughter once felt powerful. It once echoed like dominance. But now it ricocheted off the wrong walls. Because gossip always collapses when it collides with clarity. And you, by merely showing up, were the embodiment of that collision. Your scars were your silence. Your composure was your rebuttal. The resilience in your eyes said what words couldn't TG, that while they were busy narrating fiction, you were enduring storms without a narrator. And that truth made them squirm. They were used to controlling the version of you that others received. But now they had to reconcile with the version that survived what they couldn't imagine. And they had no idea how to address it. You wore no mask, and that unnerved them. Because people who rely on pretense get disoriented when someone walks in fully whole. You didn't need a dramatic entrance. You didn't need applause. Your presence was disruptive not because it was loud, but because it was rooted. They saw the war in your face, not as bruises or blood, but as posture, as poise, the kind of expression only owned by those who've been silenced too long to care for small talk. You had become fluent in restraint, and now they were trapped in the infantile babble of their own cowardice, realizing just how immature it all sounded next to your lived discipline. They whispered to each other in confusion. The stories they'd clung to were unraveling under your gaze. You had no desire to expose them, no craving for revenge. That made it worse. You had transcended the pettiness they thought you'd drown in, and your detachment was a mirror. It reflected back their weakness. They saw someone who no longer needed a stage, who no longer needed to be liked, who had stared too long into life's ugliest mirror and found self-worth anyway. They were watching someone who had been broken without bitterness, And that kind of strength makes shallow people feel small. You never ask for justice. You just stopped entertaining their noise. The difference was surgical. One day you were accessible. The next, you were untouchable. Not because you ran, because you stopped explaining your worth in rooms where people only came to confirm their ignorance. They used to speak about you freely, tossing your name around like a ball at recess. Now they hesitated, because the person they imagined was gone, and what remained was someone sculpted in solitude, textured by trauma, and polished in purpose. They mistook your absence for weakness, but it was your preparation, and they never saw it coming. They used to mock your breakdowns. Behind closed doors, they laughed at the pieces. But now they're face to face with the architecture of your rebirth. You didn't rise like a phoenix with flames and fireworks. You rose like concrete through cracked earth. Slow, silent, undeniable. You didn't need theatrics. You needed consistency. And while they played audience to each other's illusions, you became your own sanctuary. Your life stopped being a performance and became a process. And now they don't know how to interact with someone who isn't addicted to being seen. You didn't return for them. You didn't owe them closure. You returned because the version of you that once needed their acceptance had outgrown its craving. You walked in with no need to correct the lies. That made them more defensive than if you'd screamed. Because people who build their pride on half-truths can't stand being outclassed by someone who doesn't even care to defend themselves. You outgrew the performance. You outgrew the need for redemption arcs written by other people. And the tension in the air wasn't yours to hold. It was theirs. You just happened to be the truth walking by. They saw your war, but they didn't know its name. They only knew it silenced theirs. The strength on your face, the stillness in your jaw, the depth in your presence. It all made their criticisms sound like nursery rhymes. You were no longer the one being talked about. You became the one they avoided discussing altogether. Because the new you made them feel foolish, forever thinking they had power over someone sculpted in fire. Your very being now served as proof that some people grow so far beyond gossip. The people who spread it get left talking to themselves. They will remember the day you walked in without needing attention and still got it. They'll remember how everything they thought they understood about you melted the second your eyes hold storms they'll never survive. They'll recall the discomfort, the embarrassment, the sudden recognition that while they wasted time crafting small insults, you were crafting a new life. You made their gossip obsolete, and not by arguing, but by living. That's what truly unsettles the shallow. You didn't match their energy. You made it irrelevant. They expected you to flinch. That was the whole point of the performance. Withdraw their support, twist the narrative, bait you with silence and confusion, and then watch for the fallout. They didn't prepare for stillness. You gave them nothing. No scenes, no desperation, no pleas. Just a surgical retreat. You didn't even bother to slam the door. You let it close slowly, deliberately, without drama. And that's what broke them. You moved like someone who had long suspected the betrayal and just needed confirmation. Once received, you stepped back into yourself, calm, collected, uninterested in theatrics. You weren't destroyed. You were released. What confused them first was the absence of chaos. They thought betrayal would shake your sense of self, that you'd question your worth, spiral into reaction. But instead of rage, you met them with an upgraded posture. Your glow wasn't decorative. It was functional. It didn't say, "Look at me." It said, "I've seen everything, and I'm still standing." And that terrified them more than any outburst ever could. They expected emotional evidence of your collapse. What they got instead was someone who had already turned pain into boundaries, heartbreak into clarity. You didn't just glow. You radiated indifference toward everything they weaponized. You never posted a sud-tweet. You never tried to convince mutuals. You simply lived in a way that erased their narrative. And in rooms where your name was once torn apart like meat for cowards, now they sit quiet, watching you operate like none of it ever touched you. But it did touch you. It just didn't control you. The wounds were real, but the healing was private. That was the power shift. Not that you won, but that you evolved past needing to prove that you did. And they had no framework for someone who didn't seek revenge, only refinement. They assumed silence meant submission. That's the mistake people make when they only understand conflict through noise. But your silence wasn't surrender. It was evolution. You stopped giving them access to your reaction because you understood that reaction is currency, and you refused to spend it on people who were emotionally bankrupt. You didn't forgive them to be noble. You forgave them because carrying their mess would tide your future. They thought they hurt you deeply, but what they really did was free you to live without them. You just never explained that part, and the not knowing still eats at them. There was no grand return, no comeback party. You simply began living well, and your peace was louder than their gossip ever was. The people who tried to sabotage your career watched you move with such unbothered grace that it made them question the very lies they told. Because if someone was really as fragile, bitter, or unstable as they claimed you were, why do you now move like a goddamn monument? Still, silent, rooted and unshaken. Your glow didn't scream attention. It whispered maturity. And when you stopped entertaining their energy, they had to face their own reflection. They started watching you again, this time quietly. Through burner accounts, mutual connections, half-hearted check-ins, looking for signs, trying to confirm if what they were witnessing was real. And it was. You glowed not because you were trying to show them you survived, but because you no longer needed their lens to feel valid. You'd rebuilt your self-worth in the dark, brick by brick. And now, with every step, they watch someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't wait, someone who doesn't flinch, because you'd already felt the blade in your back and decided your future was more important than holding grudges. They kept expecting a breakdown, a misstep, something they could point to and say, see, they never changed. But the collapse never came. You had restructured from the inside. So while they were hoping for the old you to slip through the cracks, they were instead met with someone they couldn't decode anymore. You were no longer predictable, no longer manipulable. Your new glow didn't come from the surface. It came from internal reprogramming. They weren't terrified of your appearance. They were terrified of your stillness, because they realized that betrayal didn't break you. It just removed your tolerance. The rooms they once controlled by turning people against you are now quiet, because the people who heard their side also saw your glow. And glow speaks louder than gossip. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't scramble to rebuild old ties. You let them burn, and in the ashes, you built a life so accurate, so undeniable, that now even your silence feels like a verdict. The glow wasn't revenge. It was relief. You stopped caring whether they understood. And that's when they started fearing whether they ever really knew you at all. You never asked for loyalty, but they gave you betrayal. You never asked for praise, but they gave you slander. You never asked for protection, but they gave you exposure. So you walked away, and now they watch someone unbothered by loss, untouched by gossip, unmoved by manipulation. Your glow didn't come from what they did. It came from how little it matters now. You didn't respond because you didn't need to. You had upgraded your soul while they were still playing victim to their own projections. And when they looked at your face, they saw no pain left to hold against you. There's something haunting about a person who survived emotional ambushes and came out elegant. You are no longer interested in revenge stories. You became the lesson, and their betrayal became your biography's turning point, not its tragedy. You carry no bitterness, but your boundaries are brutal. And when they looked at you, glowing yet untouched, it wasn't beauty that scared them. It was the proof that they failed to ruin you. And people who fail at destroying someone they once controlled fear nothing more than their target becoming untouchable. They never imagined you'd become the kind of person they have to respect in silence. Their entire strategy depended on you breaking down somewhere public, on you reaching out, stumbling, needing clarification or closure, hoping for their attention. They were counting on their absence to be the thing that haunted you. Instead, your absence from them became the echo they couldn't shut off. Every room you no longer entered, every call you never returned, every celebration you didn't invite them to, those moments became markers. They showed that your life moved on without needing their voice in the background. And now they sit, watching someone they quietly tried to erase become the reference point for a different kind of resilience. You didn't reinvent yourself through aesthetics. You didn't announce your healing with slogans or hashtags. You became different because you actually changed. And that change was chemical, spiritual, structural, not temporary, not performative. You didn't just glow, you stabilized. And people who thrive on instability hate that. They hate when the chows they cause no longer works, when your nervous system stops jumping at their presence. When your energy no longer folds itself to keep the peace. They didn't fear your light. They feared your immunity, because it meant the version of you who used to explain, defend, and tolerate no longer existed. And once that version was gone, so was their access. They began to reflect, but it was too late. By the time they understood your silence, you were fluent in a new language, one that didn't center their confusion, one that no longer paused to make others comfortable. Your glow wasn't a comeback. It was a quiet refusal to keep bleeding for people who applauded your wounds. Now they don't know where to place you. You don't fit their narrative anymore. You've transcended it. They can't call you bitter because you aren't angry. They can't call you broken because you're whole. So they sit with the only thing left, regret. And it tastes worse than your success ever could. They tell people you changed, but what they really mean is you healed without permission. They wanted to be part of your recovery so they could frame it as redemption for them too. But healing in their absence meant they played no role in your return. And that threatens the ego, so they paint you as distant, as cold, as difficult.